The public have come round to the idea of industrial action. And perhaps thanks to the effective argumentation of RMT leader Mick Lynch, a plurality now support last week's rail strike. As you can see, before the strike started, 42% of the public opposed the strike, compared to 41% who were in favour. By the end of the strikes, that had flipped. 45% now supported the strikes, with only 37% against. Not everyone has softened to the cause of organised labour, though. This was Tony Blair speaking to Newsnight.
I wondered what your position is on strikes. Obviously, Keir Starmer says don't go on the RMT picket line. There's big public support, though, for the RMT.
Yeah, but here's the thing that Labour, in my view, should say about this. You can have every sympathy for people who, as a result of the situation the economy's in, the cost of living crisis, high inflation, that they're angry about the situation, anxious about their terms and conditions of employment. And that's why you can understand why these movements for strike action take place. But the truth is, if Labour wants to form a government, it's got to be very clear. The country at the moment can't afford a whole wave of public sector strikes.
So the 3% government guideline is something you'd back?
The Labour's going to have to decide what its position is on that, but it's got to decide it in a way that makes the public feel, whatever their sympathy are for people who are on strike, makes the public think Labour can be trusted with government.
But just to be clear, and to finish, you believe below inflation pay settlements are necessary in this moment?
In the end, each pay settlement is a matter of negotiation.
In the public sector?
In the public sector. But I think for Labour to support a wave of public sector strikes is going to be very damaging for Labour. So I know it'll come under huge pressure, but one of the things you've got to do when you're in opposition and you're really aiming for government is you've got to put yourself in the position that you would be if you became the government.
That was multi-millionaire Tony Blair telling everyone else they should accept a pay cut. Aaron, how would you respond to Tony Blair there?
He's saying two separate things. One is, I think the implicit argument is that there shouldn't be pay increases for the public sector that keeps up with inflation. Then he's making a separate point, which is, Labour shouldn't publicly argue for that. I think he's wrong on both counts, but I most certainly think he's wrong on the first count. And I find it extraordinary, Michael, that somebody who has a personal property portfolio of £50 million, along with his wife and his son. His wife, Cherie, has not one, but two property management companies. They are buy-to-let landlords across Greater Manchester, single-bed units, it should be said. People locked into the rental sector, Michael. We know that people between their mid-30s, mid-40s are 3 times more likely to rent than 20 years ago, precisely because of the economic model championed by Mr. Blair. And his wife and his son are getting extraordinarily rich off it. This is a man who owns not one, but two £10 million properties. And he's saying that we can't afford to give workers pay increases that keep up with inflation. So they have to get poorer in real terms. Here's a question that Mark Urban, who I don't really rate as a journalist at Newsnight. I mean, BBC Newsnight now with Lewis Goodall going is just crap. It's crap. Utterly predictable, low information, banality. But here's a question I would have asked Tony Blair if I was Mark Urban. How much are you increasing rent by in the properties that your wife and son own in Greater Manchester? How much is rent going up by? Is it more than inflation? Is it less? How much less? Or how much more? I'd be intrigued to know the answer, Michael. But those are the kind of tough questions we don't see in the media. We have Tony Blair giving predictable answers to predictable questions, and nobody is learning anything new. And that's precisely because things like BBC Newsnight aren't the media. They're not there to inform you. This is effectively a propaganda outlet. This is somebody saying exactly what they want to tell you in a broadcast, public relations way in order to bolster a particular faction of the Labour Party. He's outriding for Keir Starmer. What does the audience learn from this, really, Michael? When we're looking at the highest inflation now for at least 40 years. It's already the highest it's been for 40 years. I would submit we're not learning very much. And so to conclude, this is somebody whose son is worth in excess of 100 million. This is someone whose wife owns 2 property companies. This is somebody who owns 2 properties themselves worth more than 10 million. Peter Mandelson also owns a £10 million property, by the way. And yet they're somehow seen as authoritative, authentic, informative voices around pay disputes and people not getting poorer. Nobody takes this seriously except Tony Blair and except the likes of the BBC. And increasingly, it's incongruent with the public conversation. And look, let's see if they interview Mick Lynch and if they get better ratings. I think we both know the answer to that.
I'd like to see a Tony Blair, Mick Lynch debate, actually. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that would have been the question to ask him, right? Because rents are going up 15% on average this year. In fact, that was exactly the rent increase I was given this year, 15%. And I haven't seen a single person on television ask a landlord whether they are going to take a cut to the income they get for essentially doing nothing, or are they going to just go with the market and charge whatever they can? Because it looks to me like they're all charging whatever they can. They're going with the market and they're getting a fat payout, right? We're told we have to accept pay cuts. Landlords, they're increasing their rents by above inflation and no one's complaining about them at all. And obviously that pushes inflation. The reason people need a pay rise is because their costs have increased. So why don't we talk about those costs increasing? Because there's choices involved there as well. Rent is not a law of nature. That's a decision made by landlords because they want to protect their income or even increase their income whenever they feel they can get away with it. Now, workers, we're supposed to sort of think about the greater good. Oh, no, we should accept lower wages because if we all ask for higher wages, then that would maybe increase inflation. The inflation is not our fault, right? The inflation is the fault of a war in Ukraine, supply chain issues, and then people like landlords and profiteers making the most of it, rubbing their hands together and getting richer than ever. And then you've got Tony Blair on television saying, oh, a serious party of government has to tell ordinary people they have to accept a pay cut. Now, of course, Tony Blair has been basically getting exactly what he wants when it comes to the Labour Party's stance. You may have already seen this clip from David Lammy.
What about GMB and Unite workers who are the unions representing the BA check-in staff, the ones who say they're going to go on strike, who balloted for strike this summer, who could ruin a lot of people's summer holidays? They're balloting for strike because of a 10% pay cut that was imposed on them during the pandemic. They want it reversed. Do you support them? Will you stand with them?
Well, look, all of us are feeling the pinch with inflation. Many of us might want a rise of 10%. In truth, most people understand it's unlikely that you're going to get that.
That was David Lammy saying everyone in Britain should expect and accept a real terms pay cut. That's just reality. And so for that reason, he didn't back the British Airways strike. It was pretty gross, and it also ended up being pretty embarrassing. That's because Lammy went on to admit later that he had no idea what he was talking about. In response to a constituent who complained about his opposition to the BA strikes, Lammy wrote this: "When Sophie Rayworth said that workers wanted to reverse a previous pay cut of 10%, I mistakenly understood it to mean that they were seeking an above-inflation pay rise. I was not across the details of the case. It is right that those of us in public life admit when they have made a mistake. With this in mind, I apologise to all BA workers." Now, a couple of things to say about this. First of all, the arrogance, right? You're a frontbencher on the Labour Party. The arrogance of going on television and saying, I disagree with the British Airways strike, a democratic vote, a whole workforce of people say, I disagree with their strike when you've admitted later to knowing nothing about it. You've admitted to making a mistake. Maybe you should just apologize for the fact that you spoke about something you didn't understand. You could say there, I don't actually expect Labour Party frontbenchers to say, we support all and every strike. I don't. That historically has never actually been the role of Labour frontbenchers. But you can at least research something before you cast aspersions about a movement by people. The other thing to say here is David Lammy saying, oh, sorry, I opposed it because I thought they were fighting a real terms pay cut. In fact, they're only fighting a nominal pay cut. Their nominal pay was cut by 10%. They just want to bring that back up to the level it was. So we're saying, oh no, as long as they're still accepting a real terms pay cut, I can support their strike. Is this now the conditions for supporting a strike? If you are not willing to accept a real terms pay cut, then we are not going to support your struggle. It's a pretty interesting bar to set for any Labour movement, isn't it? We'll only support you if you're willing to get poorer.
We're all feeling the pinch. Well, are you, David Lammy? Because in the last 3 years, you've earned £141,000 in speaking fees from the likes of Deloitte and Google and Facebook. That doesn't sound like feeling the pinch to me, although maybe we live in such stratospherically different worlds that 141,000 in extra parliamentary income just from speaking, not his books. Well, we're all feeling the pinch. I don't think so. I think there are RMT members out there or BA workers who are worried about putting on the heating next winter. Rightly so, by the way, because it's only going in one direction. And you're trying to say you're in the same boat as them? Have a little bit of humility and don't take us for idiots. That's the first thing. There are some very talented, very high values politicians out there who earn good money. In politics, people do earn good money. And I don't resent the fact, by the way, if somebody earns money doing extra speaking events or whatever, good for them. But then don't do that on the one hand and then pontificate about workers trying to see their wages keep up with inflation. My goodness. When did this become normal? When did this become acceptable? Again, though, Michael, Mick Lynch exposed this. The media in this country is so pathetic and incapable of basic preparation and doing their job, they couldn't put that question to him. A decent prepared journalist, you would do this, Michael. I think you and I would do this, but I like to think you're the best host, I think, in Novara Media. If you were interviewing David Lammy and he said that, you would definitely have to hand, well, you earned £141,000 in 3 years in speaking fees. Are you really feeling the pinch, Mr. Lammy? Andrew Neil probably would have asked that in his defense. When did you see that at the BBC last time? They don't do it. They don't do their jobs. They just sort of turn up, go through the motions, bash the left. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Look, these are people's lives we're talking about. We're seeing people's wages fall by 10, 15% in 1 year. That's a lot of money. So this, okay, pedestrian, I earn £150,000 a year. I don't really have to do a proper job here. No, you do have to do a job. You're a public service broadcaster. Your job is to work in the public interest. So pull your finger out of your ass. Well, that's the first point, Michael, about Lammy and his extracurricular activities. And then, like you say, he's not across the detail. Well, I thought this was Mr. Competent. So either you lied or you're incompetent. Which one is it? And by the way, neither is a particularly good answer for a politician. I'm going to be charitable and say that it's not competent. Well, I wasn't across the detail. They gave you the details in the question, David.
I mean, what more is there to say? I mean, I haven't seen a party get themselves in more of a mess than the Labour Party have when it comes to the cost of living crisis and the strikes. I can't think of a worse situation than this, than a party completely fucking up a political opportunity. And I say this not because, I mean, if I was leading the Labour Party, I would support the RMT strikes. But I don't think, as I've said, I don't think the Labour Party does have to support every strike. They haven't historically. There has always been sort of a bit of a division of Labour between the trade unions and the Labour Party. But what the Labour Party has actively done is say to the whole public, right, you should accept a pay cut. And we've had cabinet members. So there was the chief secretary to the Treasury went on TV a couple of weeks ago and said explicitly, everyone in this country, every worker should accept a pay rise below inflation. You've got a government minister in the Treasury saying you're all going to get poorer. Now, if I'm the Labour Party in that situation, if I don't care about anything, if all I want to do is get elected and I have no politics whatsoever, that is a political opportunity. Because you tell the whole country, look, this party in government, they want all of you, every single one of you, to get poorer. And that's not acceptable. We don't think you should get poorer, right? And we'll come up with some answers so that you don't have to accept that. But instead, what we've got is front bench politicians going on television saying we're all feeling the pinch, even though they're stinking rich, as Aaron's just described there, and saying, oh no, of course, everyone is going to have to get poorer. Of course. Closing the political space absolutely, and basically saying, don't expect anything better than to get poorer. Now, it's just remarkable, right? It is so different from what Keir Starmer was saying in his leadership pitch, so different from what Boris Johnson was saying just a year ago. They were all talking about how Britain needs a pay rise. Now, all of a sudden, everyone needs to accept a pay cut, and there isn't a single voice on either front bench who's willing to contest that, which I suppose is why Mick Lynch makes so many waves when he goes on television, because he's the only person, well, I say brave, but it should be pretty goddamn obvious, the only person who's going on television and saying, actually, don't accept getting poorer. Since when were we supposed to accept getting poorer?
When your rent goes up by 15%, the political class, the so-called opposition, Labour and the Liberal Democrats, so-called opposition, we have three pro-austerity parties again. They'll say, well, that's the market. What can you do? But if the people subject to those rent increases want a 15% increase in their wages, please don't do that. You'll drive inflation. How else are they meant to cover the increase in rent unless they're getting poorer? Or like we say with the tickets, with the RMT dispute, private rail operators increase the price of the tickets every year by inflation. But if the RMT drivers, ASLEF drivers rather, and RMT staff, by the way, RMT staff average £31,000 a year salary, not big money. Literally the average wage for the UK is £31,000. If they want their pay to increase by inflation, don't be so irresponsible. How could you? You're increasing tickets by inflation. But this, of course, is called bad economics. And it returns to that fundamental question. Bad economics for who? Bad economics for who? It's called bad economics by people who say we're all feeling the pinch while they're earning 141,000 speaking at dinner parties and cocktail parties for Google and Facebook. It's bad economics for them. Because the reason why they're paid so much to speak at these events is precisely because their political work is about guaranteeing high profits, even if that comes at the cost of low wages. It's really not that difficult to put together. Our media completely fails to do it, Michael. Our media completely. The thing that's really shocked me the most, I think, with this inflation crisis is the complete incapacity of the media to do their job, even to come to work and do a 6 out of 10. It's extraordinary.
The media, they only really cover what the Labour Party is saying and what the Tory Party is saying. So if the Labour Party aren't saying it and if the Tory Party aren't saying it, no one's going to say it. Because they just see their job as sort of commentating on this game that's going on over there. They're not very good at critiquing something which both parties are getting fundamentally wrong. All of us here at Novara Media are working harder than ever to keep scrutinising establishment politicians and the media barons who protect them. We don't have billionaire funders. We don't have advertising partnerships. We're funded entirely by you. If you've ever thought about supporting us, now's the time to go to novaramedia.com/support and donate anything you can from just £1 per month. Defy the corporate media, join our monthly supporters and help build our supporter base to 10,000 strong.